We were talking about talent pairing and interesting combinations of people on shows. Just to finish up with the Kennedy Center Honors, what do you think were some of the more interesting kind of pairings of the talent that appeared to honor particular honorees?
Well, we don't pair people up per se. I mean, it's usually one person and it's not a lot of people, but there are a couple of things that do stand out. I mean, Jack Black's been on the show several times and he loves it. When we did the tribute to Paul McCartney, we had some really great people, Sting and people like that, but there is a great story from the Kennedy Center Honors that does stand out for me, and it involves Gene Kelly, who I did a lot of shows with, and I knew, he knew me just through the shows, of course. And it was the year that we honored, I believe it was Comden and Green, and it might have been the Nicholas brothers also. And Gene Kelly had a connection to both of these people. And Nick Vanoff was producing the show with George Stevens at the time. And Gene was to come on to honor Comden and Green. But we had Gregory Hines and Savion Glover and other tap dancers pay tribute to the Nicholas brothers. And Nick Vanoff had found this group in New York, kind of like, I think they called themselves the Rocksteady Crew, and they were kind of break dancers, whatever, which was kind of popular at the time. And Gene came over early to the rehearsal, and I had actually put the schedule together. I had worked with the director and with George to put the schedule together so that those tributes would be rehearsed back to back, Comden and Green and Nicholas brothers, because I knew that Gene Kelly would want to see what we were doing for the Nicholas brothers. And Gene came over in his typical Gene Kelly way, you know, with his jacket and the whole. And, you know, I really liked Gene Kelly because I had studied tap dancing when I was younger, and he knew that I'd been a dancer of some sorts. And, of course, he was one of those people that I did hug and hold his hand and brought him in. And we were standing in the wings, and Gregory Hines and Savion were dancing on the tap. There was a specific tap floor on the stage. And then this other group also, I don't remember who they were, other tappers. And they saw Gene, and he was just standing there in the corner like Gene Kelly with a hat. And Gregory knew Gene, of course, and so did Savion, but these other dancers didn't. And they turned around, and the eyes just popped open, Gene Kelly. Now, the other group, the Rocksteady group, were also waiting. And when they finished the rehearsal, I brought Gene back into the green room to wait, and because we were going to do the Comden and Green tribute next. And the Rocksteady crew, or whatever this group was called, they were about to leave, and they're like 6 or 7 guys. You know, they were performing on the street. That's where Nick had found them. And I said to them, do you know who's in that green room? And they said, who? And I said, Gene Kelly. And they went, oh. And I said, would you like to meet him? Oh. So I went in and I said, Gene, I said, and he was sitting down, I said, there's some young men out there that would really love to meet you, and you saw them dancing there. He says, of course, bring them in, because he loved young talent. And he stood up, and I brought them in, and they all knelt down and said, Maestro. And that was a moment. And you know who else did that a lot was Wynton Marsalis. He did that when he came to perform for, I don't remember who he performed for, but he did that also, and we had the Howard University Jazz Ensemble perform. And they came into the green room, and he almost gave them like a master class. So those are the kind of moments that you can have on a show like that, on the Kennedy Center Honors. There's so many different combinations of people, and there is also a sense of community, because as each performer is waiting to go on and off the stage, when they come off the stage, they're so excited to have done it and so relieved that the other artists in the same tribute and other tributes congratulate them. And it's like a group it's like a group. It's not like anybody's separate at that point. And that's why that show is so special. That's why some of these memories are so amazing.
Let's go through some of the other shows you've done,
Mm-hmm.
Specials and shows, and you can give me a short memory or an anecdote or something, just what kind of sticks out for you about, or some of the artists, okay? And I'll just kind of mention, and you can just go
Yeah.
from there.
Well, I'd like to talk about Christopher Reeve, if that's okay.
Okay, well, we can do that. That's
Or later.
Yeah, we can do that. That's for the Oscar
Later.
show.
Yeah. We can do that later then if you
Okay.
want.
Why don't we do that right at the beginning when we start talking about the Oscars, okay?
Okay.
But I want to kind of get through some of the other shows and specials you've done, and just maybe a quick memory or like.
Well, we did the first Shirley MacLaine special. Shirley MacLaine, If They Could See Me Now, See Me Now was her first television special. I think it was the best one that was done, actually. I did early things that I did. I did something with Alvin Ailey. I did a television special with him that James Lipton produced, and I wound up getting to know Alvin. I've done 4 presidential inaugural galas, opening for Jimmy Carter. I did his, which was the first actual television show that had been done from the Kennedy Center, was his inaugural gala. I did the inaugural gala for Ronald Reagan, the one that Frank Sinatra produced, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41 that Don Mischer produced,
Right.
and Bill Clinton's first one that Gary Smith produced, and those were amazing. You can't, I mean, those are exciting and amazing and thrilling, and I also did.
Well, let me ask you something about those.
Mm-hmm.
What was the process for getting talent for each of those inaugural
Well, it was usually the
celebrations?
producer and, whoever was the chairperson of that show. Now, when Gary Smith did the one for Bill Clinton, then he, of course, invited a lot of people. But it usually was the chairman of the event or the executive producer. In the case of the one for Ronald Reagan, it was Frank Sinatra. I mean, Elizabeth Taylor came and Tom Selleck and all these people. That was the year that they couldn't have the swearing in outside. It was snowed in. We were snowed in. And for Jimmy Carter, I don't remember because that was one of the first of those kind of things that I had done. And that was thrilling. I mean, Warren Beatty and Michael Douglas and all these amazing people, Paul Newman, everybody. But, I didn't have as much interaction with some of the people until much later on because there were so many people involved with these kind of shows. I mean, you're dealing with the Washington side, you're dealing with the event side. There's so many pieces to that. But
Was there a sensitivity about the politics of who was going to be president? Like sometimes liberal or Democratic presidents might be more friendly with the entertainment
well, I
side
think the
of
talent
things.
was determined by who the president was. I think that was.
'Cause I'm curious about Bush 41. Who,
I don't even remember who was on that
Oh,
show, to
okay.
be very honest. But, I did another special with George Herbert Walker Bush where we honored him that George and Michael Stevens produced.
Mm-hmm.
And all the former presidents showed up, and he was such a nice man, and I received a thank you note from him personally, which I thought was quite gracious.
Okay, some other shows you did. You worked with Andy Williams.
I did one of the Andy had many television series. I only did the series that Bob Scheer directed. Pierre Cossette produced it, and it was just one of the series. But I had worked with Andy before when he hosted the Grammy Awards. I really liked Andy. I mean, he had one of the most beautiful voices of anybody. And, there were a lot of shows with Muppets on them and all these kind of things. I also did...
Was he pretty involved in picking the talent for
No,
his shows?
no,
No?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think that was determined by Pierre,
Okay.
and there weren't that many guest stars. It was only half an hour,
Yeah.
and we did them like 4 or 5 at a time as well.
Okay.
I did the opening and closing ceremonies of 3 Olympics here in the United States, Los Angeles with David L. Wolper, and I did Atlanta with Don Mischer, and Salt Lake City with Don Mischer.
What were your responsibilities on those?
A lot. Talent, logistics, procedures, those are big shows and big events and a lot of moving parts to it that involve security and all kinds of things. The one in Atlanta was amazing because that's when we surprised everybody and had Muhammad Ali come out with the torch at the very top and kept it a secret. And that was a big moment. And L.A., of course, because it was our hometown, it was great. And, John Williams conducted this amazing orchestra, and I don't know what I did. I wound up working with Terry Jastrow, who was directing for the network, and he'd never done anything like this before. And he kind of used me as an AD, which, of course, as I had said earlier, this was not my forte at all. So, I kind of had a strange role on that one. It was kind of like they brought in people at the last minute. But Lionel Richie was on the closing ceremonies. He sang that fabulous song all night long, and it was thrilling because it was our hometown. And then the Atlanta one, of course, was huge. I mean, we had a huge staff working on that, and it was thrilling. It was just absolutely thrilling. Tons of people, tons of performers. Trying to figure out where everybody was going to have a dressing room, if they were going to be in a locker room, or are they going to, all this kind of stuff. These shows boil down to, and I'm always joke about it, a lot of these shows boil down to credentials and tickets. A lot of them, access. And it's, they think a lot of it could be very exciting, but a lot of it is really a lot about logistics. And over the years, having worked with Marty and all the other things that I did, I really realized that that's what I was really good at. I knew what I wasn't good at, the technical stuff, but I was good at logistics and creating ways in which to do things and systems and just kind of figuring out how we can get things done. And that's why I guess my forte has been live and big shows.
For those Olympics shows, were there any interesting problems that you didn't anticipate that you had to fix?
There was always problems on something like that because it always had to do with security and access and who could have how many tickets to go to certain events, because if you brought a star in to do the Olympics, they always wanted to see the other events. And just the care of them, again, and of course it was a big, exciting event for them to be a part of. And not enough time to rehearse, of course, but Atlanta was thrilling. It really was thrilling. The stadium had been built in an area that was not in the best part of town, and so security was very tight there. And we were in the stadium where they did track and field, so it was very interesting for us to see a lot of this stuff going on. We had a lot of athletes on the show. I just remember that I was standing in the tunnel with a lot of the track and field athletes and some of the great boxing heroes of the past. We had them all lined up, and nobody knew that Ali was going to be on the show. And when they saw him at the top with the torch, a lot of them actually were not only surprised, but actually got very emotional about it. The inaugural gala for Bill Clinton was just thrilling because here was a Democrat that was, it was exciting. And, Gary had Barbra Streisand perform, and we had all these movie stars, and we were in this venue that I don't think they use anymore. It's in Maryland. It was like a big football stadium. And we had like a huge compound in this, like the loading dock area where everybody had their own Winnebago. There must have been like 25 Winnebagos. And we had opera singers, and we had movie stars, and, Goldie Hawn and Sally Field, who I had known, and Michael Jackson was on the show, and it was thrilling because, it was just thrilling.
Did you have an army of people escorting talent?
Yes.
How did you handle that?
There are just a lot of people working on the show.
And you had to supervise that?
Yes, oversaw all of that. And, there were people that the committee had assigned, to help out. These were a lot of people that had worked on the campaign that were advanced people. So there were a lot of people that were assigned to take care of people. But, yeah, taking care of all those people and all those, what they needed in their dressing rooms and how they were going to get there, and transportation and credentials and tickets and everything.
And how did you communicate? And how has it changed with technology through the years?
Well, when I started out, there was no such thing as a fax machine. You know, that first Oscars that I did, you know, revisions, changed dramatically. But you know, and the Kennedy Center Honors, all those years in the beginning, typewriter. I was never famous for correcting the third sheet, however. We had carbon paper. How did we do all of this? We did it. We got it done. It was the same amount of people on these shows. We got it done without all of this technology. We got it done. We picked up the phone. We talked to people on the phone. There was much more personal communication. You know, we had to talk to people on the phone. And I think that that's still important because I think you can miscommunicate things in an email or a text. And I think when people hear your voice and they hear your passion for something, I think it really means something. So the technology has changed dramatically. I have a BlackBerry, I have an iPad, I have a computer. I don't text very much. I don't have a smartphone. I don't have Facebook. I don't tweet. And that's by choice. For me, I don't want that much information out there about myself, and I don't feel it's personal enough. But I am very big on email. I am known to be a big email person, and I think that's how the technology has changed. It's less personal. But it helps. I mean, it really helps so that you don't have to get up in the middle of the night and call somebody in Europe or New York. Now you can just send an email and you know that they're going to get it. So it's extremely helpful. But all those years doing Kennedy Center Honors, with all the logistics and all these other shows, without technology, and we got it done. You know, I wonder how we got it done, but we did. We got it done. And with the same amount of staff, if not less.
How hard was it to get Muhammad Ali?
I think it was very hard. Don Mischer was very instrumental in making that happen. And then we worked on the plan and how we were going to bring him in. And then obviously it wasn't just me. It was people higher up that were responsible for getting him to come into town. They brought him in by a plane. We put him in a hotel that nobody knew about. We had the van blocked off, and we rehearsed with him in the middle of the night. But Don was very involved, very instrumental, along with obviously somebody as part of the committee. But it didn't leak. It didn't leak. It didn't get out. We kept it a secret. And you know how hard it is to keep a secret. But that's one thing that I can say about me. I can keep a secret. I'm, in fact, to a fault, actually.
For you, what was the biggest challenge working on the various Olympic ceremonies?
Well, because there's so many moving parts to it, and really the most difficult part is the logistic parts of it. I must say that when we did the Salt Lake City Olympics with Don Mischer, when he did that, it was right after 9/11, and so there was a really moving piece of that when we had the firemen come in and they brought the flag in and all that was very moving. It was cold. I was also working on another show at the time. I think I was working on the Oscars at that time. I'm not really sure. I can't remember because it was in the winter. I was working. It was in the early stages of the Oscars. But I flew up on the weekends into Salt Lake City. I flew up every single weekend. And then I was there for a week and all of that. I don't think I was doing the Oscars, but it was around that time. And it's all about logistics. It really is. And making sure that everybody has the same information, keeping everybody informed. And things change, you know, like when we got there for rehearsal, like Dorothy Hamill or one of the ice skaters that was supposed to do a big number injured their ankle. And there's always something last minute, you know. And that's the one thing that I love about doing a live show, is that it's never over until it's over. There's always something that's going to happen that's going to surprise you. So it's really important to have a strong foundation of organization so that you can be prepared. Hopefully you can be prepared for anything that would come up.
On these big event live shows, did the producers typically have a wish list of talent, or did you come with one too, or was it mainly?
We worked together on it.
Okay.
We worked together on it. I mean, there's like a list of people that everybody wants on every single show, and it changes. But yes, of course, you know, I come up with ideas. I come in with a list. or depending on what the show is, it's determined, the person that we want to be on the show is determined by the kind of show it is. But we work together on it, and it's never ultimately my decision, but I do come in with suggestions, and I'm very much a part of that process in terms of a collaboration. And as I said earlier, because of my history doing certain shows for a long period of time, I kind of know what might work. But it doesn't always work sometimes, Sometimes you put, the producers want you to put two people together that really don't want to be together. They just don't. They have no reason to be together, and why should they be, and this and that, and the producer wants it, and so we try to make it happen. But, yeah, I'm very much a part of that process, the creative process, which means that I have to keep up with who's out there. It's hard to keep up now.
What was it like working on the Johnny Cash show?
That was great because, again, that was a first-of-its-kind type of a show. I did not do the summer series. That's how it started. But I came in, Stan Jacobson, it was a Canadian group that actually put it together for Warner Brothers, Screen Gems. And I came in for the actual series because it was only going to be a summer series, but it got picked up for a series. And a friend of mine who also worked on the show, we drove across country to Nashville. And we did it in the original Ryman Auditorium, the original Grand Ole Opry, which after the show finished, that was the end of it. Nobody worked in there again because they were building Opryland. And we constructed, the producers and the director constructed a makeshift control room in like the alley, and it was freezing and it was hot.
The alley between Tootsie's and Ryman?
Pardon?
All those
Yes.
There's like a bunch of clubs and honky-tonks right there.
Honky-tonks. It was like one restaurant that you went to, Vizcaya.
Yeah.
We stayed at the Ramada Inn that was near the railroad tracks in the worst part of town. And, if you saw the movie I Walk the Line with Reese Witherspoon and Joaquin Phoenix, where that movie ends, where John and June's relationship starts, when they get married, is kind of when that series began. They were newly married. He was sober. She was going to be pregnant. She got pregnant during the run of that show, and they were fantastic. I mean, both of them were larger than life. I loved both of them. He called me Big Red. He was a poet. He was deep. He was intuitive. He watched you, and he knew. And she was the same, but she was different. She was like an earth mother, full of life, gorgeous with this long hair, madly in love. And everybody came on that show. We flew them in. They stayed at this Ramada Inn where we all stayed. That it had an elevator to the second floor. And they came into town, and everybody did the show. And it was for me, because I had not been involved with country music. So that's where I developed a real appreciation and respect for it. And Chris Christopherson was around a lot because he was a really good friend of John's. And, everybody came on the show. Linda Ronstadt and the Eagles and Neil Diamond and Waylon Jennings, and even Kirk Douglas did the show. I don't know what
Denver,
he was.
I think was on.
Huh?
John Denver, I believe.
John Denver.
Did the talent for that show come from Johnny Cash himself to a large degree?
He invited people, but the producers also invited people. But no, he approved the list, of course. And a lot were his friends, Merle Haggard, Tom Paul Glaser and the Glaser brothers. I mean, and we got to know these people, the Tennessee Three and Mother Maybelle and Anita Carter, and, we were like a family. What's interesting, though, is that Nashville itself at that time was not welcoming the Hollywood folk with open arms. They really weren't. We thought, oh, here we come, but that it wasn't that way at all. It was a very much of a community, and, we didn't impose on them, but we were not greeted with open arms. We were called the Hollywood people, But again, I was doing that job where I was sitting in the truck and all of that, and I wasn't the talent coordinator on that show, but it was fantastic. And we rehearsed a couple of days, and then they edited it. It wasn't live. And it was a great experience. I stayed with the show for a year, and then I couldn't stand living there anymore in that hotel. It just got to me. everybody got crazy actually living in that hotel. People turned into alcoholics. Not me, but it was too confining, to live in a hotel for a year. It was rough. But he was amazing. I'll never forget him. And over the years when he was on a show that I was involved in, he and June were always warm and big red, and just larger than life. Just phenomenal.
The Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour was a spinoff, I believe, from the Smothers Brothers.
Yeah, it was.
What was that experience like for you? And that was shot in L.A., wasn't it?
It was shot in L.A. at CBS.
Okay.
So there was still a lot of that. I think the Smothers Brothers was filming at the same time. I'm not really sure. Marty Pacetta was directing it at that point. I loved it. I loved the Glenn Campbell. And Glenn was fantastic. And what made that show so unique was the beautiful set. I believe Renee Logler designed it. It was all wood, and it was on layers so that it made Glenn feel really comfortable, so that it wasn't like a real variety show set. But he was fantastic, and such a professional, beautiful voice. We kind of turned it into eventually more of a variety hour, with guest stars and people like that. But, those were the days when we all did variety shows. I did tons of those kind of shows, Manhattan Transfer and Carpenters, Summer Series, and, that's what we did. We did variety shows.
Frank Sinatra, you did a TV special with, right?
Yes, this is with Marty Pacetta. Howard W. Koch produced it.
Old Blue Eyes is back.
Old Blue Eyes is back. I think he had been in quote, retirement. He came back. We did it on the Paramount lot. We did it in the round. John DeCure, who was a movie designer, designed the set, and it was in the round, and it was, to allow Frank to be able to move around. And Gene Kelly was on the show. And I remember, and it's so funny, I just watched Anchors Away on television, when they did that famous dance number where they jumped on the bed, and, Gene had taught Frank how to dance. And so they wanted to recreate that number on the show. And at one point, during the pre-record session, I don't know if Frank wanted to cut the number, but Gene said, "Oh, please, please, it has so much meaning to me." So kept the number in. It was great. I didn't have too much I didn't go near Frank Sinatra really, except I was leaving to go to my car, and I saw him coming in, and he was in his car coming someplace, and he kind of stopped the car to say hello, and I looked at him in those blue eyes, and I thought, oh my God, no wonder you're a big star. He was electric. And he did rehearse. I know that he didn't like to rehearse, but he did rehearse for that.
And that was 1973, and the same year you worked with Elvis. Two giants.
That's Marty's, yeah, giants. That's why it was so thrilling to work for Marty, because he was doing all that kind of show.
The Elvis special, Aloha from Hawaii, live by satellite.
Mm-hmm.
From a technology standpoint, was that a new challenge to kind of do that kind of a show?
It was the first time that it had been done. And we had a control truck and all that. It was the first time that it had been done. So it kind of started the trend for that. I think there were some technical problems during the rehearsal. I don't really remember. We had Colonel Tom Parker with him. And he loved Marty. And Marty told him what to do and what he wanted from him. And Elvis did it. And he was so polite. At the time, he was dating Linda Thompson, who became Linda Jenner. Mm-hmm. And we were all at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Hotel, and I just remember that he wanted the gift shop open at midnight when he landed so that he could go in and get her something, a present. And I thought, that's really fantastic. But when I met him the next day, he was so polite. He was a real Southern gentleman. He shook my hand, called me ma'am, and he was gorgeous. He was just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful man.
Through the years, have you found when you have met stars, talent, in person, that they're different than they appear like on screen sometimes? Is there more to it sometimes, just in maybe the aura, anything about that?
I think that's a very good question, actually. But I think that they always bring who they are to what. I don't think the camera can hide who they really are. And so I think that, I know that they're performers and actors are acting, but I also think that there's always a part of them that are with them, whatever they're doing. And I find that they're most like themselves, actually. A lot of them are shy. People think this one might be cold, but they're shy, and they have so many people that are after them, and they have to be able to trust you in order to allow you to be let in. And there's many of these people now, having worked for so long and worked with a lot of the same people over and over, that it's just very natural and very normal. But I don't think they can totally hide who they are behind a part. I think there's always something there that's their true self.
Speaking of layers, when you have to deal with publicists, and sometimes they're very controlling and sometimes not so much, how do you get through the layers to get what you need from the talent, like on a show?
How I'm going to say this, I'm not trying to say this from a point of ego, but maybe it'll come off like that. I don't mean it to sound like that, but based on my reputation, which I have had to earn over the years, and the caliber of the shows that I've been involved with, and the kind of shows that I've chosen to be involved with, and I have been very careful about that over the years, that when I do call or I send an invitation or an email, people expect a certain kind of show or treatment from me. And I've had to earn that. I've had to earn that trust and that respect. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to say yes, but it means that I am able to communicate and get their attention. And it really is based on the shows that I've done, the people I've worked with. But it's still not, you still have to work hard at it, because the publicists and the managers are bombarded. They must get 50 or 60 requests, a day. It's not television shows anymore. It's everything. It's magazines. It's talk shows. It's reality shows. It's everything. So sifting through these requests takes time. But I try not to badger them, because I know that I don't like to be badgered, but when I am, I understand it. I mean, people say, I'm stalking you, and I said, please go ahead, do it, because I will have to do it with you as well. But I try not to do that, because I know what the process is. I know that they can't say yes immediately or get back to me immediately. I know that they're going to other people to discuss what this invite is. I understand all of that. And so maybe I should be more aggressive, but that's not necessarily who I am. But you do have to be patient. That's really important. And I think that you have to be really understanding of the process. And, now that productions happen so fast, producers will say, why don't I know? Why can't I get an answer so quick? And so I have to say, well, we're still waiting, and then, then the process becomes you have to call them, and what's the problem, what's the holdup, and all this. And so I just think patience is key. I've had to learn to be patient.
What is Stand Up to Cancer, and how are you involved in that?
Oh, I hope I don't start to cry. I worked with Laura Ziskin when she produced the Academy Awards, both times. And during that time, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I really became friends with her. I knew her for about 7 years. And she created Stand Up to Cancer with Sherry Lansing, Katie Couric, and who else? A couple of other women. It was the women, there was 5 women that were involved. But Katie was really a big part of it because of her relationship with her husband. And they put together this event and this organization called Stand Up to Cancer. And I did both shows with Laura. Both times, obviously, the second show she was, she didn't have any hair. She was under treatment. The first one was absolutely thrilling. I'll never forget it. It was an hour live show. People would call it a telethon. I didn't call it a telethon, but it was a fundraiser, obviously, to raise funds. We had amazing people on the phone bank. She got lots of people to do the show. She called friends. She knew everybody. And it was a very personal passion of hers. And they created something that has turned into an amazing organization where the money went directly to the scientists who were doing the work. Didn't go to other organizations. So I did it with her 2 times. The second time was very touching because she was under treatment at that point. And, she decided, I'm not going to wear the cap. And she was very brave and had no hair. And I remember she invited Elizabeth Edwards, who at that time was also not well, and was going through her own problems, of course, with her husband. And I wound up talking to Elizabeth personally and communicating with her. And she said to me, I can't wait to meet you, give you a big hug when I see you. We had tons of people on the show, and we invited a lot of people, and we were doing PSAs, and we were doing pre-tapes and phone bank, and it was really hard to get everybody we wanted. But Laura actually went on the lot, on the Sony lot, and got people out of their offices to come down to do the show. That's how forceful she was. And when I saw Elizabeth Edwards pull up in her car, she jumped out of the car. She came for rehearsal, and there she was. I said, Miss Edwards, it's such an honor to meet you. And she gave me a big hug. She says, you want to see what I look like without my wig? I said, if you want to. And she took her wig off. And I had a walkie-talkie, and I told Laura, I said, Laura, Elizabeth Edwards is here. And it was, I had to turn away. I started to cry when I saw the two of them hug one another. Here they were, these 2 women, these valiant, brave, strong women, going through the same thing. And it was very meaningful. And, my time with Laura, very special. She's one of the people that I treasure the most.
What stood out about her?
Laura was a girly girl. Here she was, this very, very powerful executive, movie producer, smart as a whip, and she was still a girly girl, meaning she wasn't, she didn't come across as a tough executive, and she loved working with women. And my interview with her, because even though I had done so many Oscars and I was kind of part of the core team, whoever worked on the show was up to the producer. So I met her, and she was sitting in her chair, and she had her feet up. And I was a shoe person at that point. And I looked at her, and I said, those are Claire Jury, aren't they? And she said, yes. And I said, well, so are these. And that's it. That was the interview. We talked about women's issues. We talked about the glass ceiling. I said, oh, come on, there's no glass ceiling for you. And she said, yes. She told me how she started out. We talked about that. We talked about everything except working on the show. When it was over, 2 hours later, I said, oh, by the way, will I be, of course. And she was the first Oscar producer who gave me a producing credit. She was the first one. She says, I can't believe that you haven't gotten this before. She gave it to me. So, and she was a friend, and she called me her rock, but of course she had other people. But it was all women that worked with her, and we had a great time. We had a great time working together.
In 2003, you worked on a big special, CBS at 75, which
Yeah.
required getting a massive amount of talent. I
Yes.
mean, how did you go about that? I mean,
Well, Gil Cates produced that, and obviously we invited tons and tons of people, and we did it in New York at the Hammerstein Ballroom, I believe, and it wasn't easy, actually. You know, a lot of people weren't available, but CBS wanted all these people, and you know, we had some people do film clips and other people, and it was great. You know, I'm trying to think, Charlie Sheen came, and we had everybody that had ever been on CBS, Carol Burnett, everybody. And it was great. Even Lassie came. Lassie was like the big star. All I remembered of that show was that I had to kind of keep track of Lassie because Lassie, you know, he had to have his own little space, or she, whatever. Was she a girl? I guess she was. She had to have her own little space with her own little water. And, you know, the trainer had to take her for walks. So it was great. It was a great show. And then there was a big party afterwards. And I know that there were people that came in on private planes. And, you know, it was terrific. And Gil had the best time doing that show. He just loved it. And he loved talking to people. And it was like a great history of CBS.
was the content of the show, was it dictated somewhat by who was available, or did CBS say,
Both.
this is who we want,
Both.
even if we have to do a remote or
Both.
a tribute?
Both. Yeah, no, CBS wanted all these people. And it was definitely dictated by the history of CBS, the 75 years, and then who was available. And if somebody wasn't available, you can be sure they became available ultimately. There were very few people that were not available. We got everybody.
Any reunions or people you had to get that were really hard to get, but you pulled it off?
I don't remember that. I really don't. You know, I don't remember too much about that show. I just remember the green room being huge, and I remember a lot of people that hadn't seen one another in a long time, you know, were really happy to see one another. And it was not an easy show to do, actually, because there were so many people involved.
Among the award shows you've done, the Emmys, the Tonys, you did the Tonys also?
Yes.
Grammys, is there, the Oscars, is there a favorite for you
Well, you know,
of those types of shows?
my heart and soul, because of so many years and so many memories, are the Oscars and Kennedy Center Honors. But I also have a really long, you know, association with the Emmys over the years. And I love doing the show because it's my business, it's my peers, it's people that I've worked with that are being honored. I did a lot of the Tony shows with Don Mischer when he produced them. Angela Lansbury hosted, and those were fun. And the wonderful thing about the Tony Awards is that all those people love to rehearse. These are real professional people. And all those Broadway shows, and to be able to see all the Broadway shows. And I did the Tonys when Gary Smith produced them. And actually, I kind of claim responsibility for suggesting Hugh Jackman to host the show. And he's since gone on to host it many times, and he actually remembers that I was part of that process and has always thanked me for it, actually. But I think my most memorable memories are from the Oscars and the honors. Those are the closest to my heart because I've done them more than any. And I would say those two, and then the Emmys, of course.
Looking at the Emmys, the Grammys, and the Tonys, just those three specific shows, is talent used in different ways for those shows? And if so, how?
Well, I can't really speak for the Tonys because I don't have the longevity with it, although I don't know, maybe 8 of them or 9, I don't remember. But the Tonys, obviously, when you're dealing with a show that has nominees, then that's what dictates the performances, because the nominees are who performs. And in the earlier days of the Tonys, it was really, they only wanted theater people to be presenters. Now, of course, it's open because there's a lot of movie folk that are doing Broadway shows, and so you can open up, and TV people as well. But at that time, it was really more Broadway people that were the presenters of the show, of the awards. So that was different. It's now changed, of course. The Grammys, of course, it's the nominees, and so the nominees dictate who's going to perform on the show, and it's an all-performance show. It's all about performing. The Oscars is not a performance show. It's about the craft of movie making, and so you have to create opportunities for performance. And the Oscars is really still a show that it's important to have a host. The host is very important. And I think the Tonys as well, because the Tonys has had some wonderful hosts recently. You know, Hugh Jackman and Neil Patrick Harris, they've all been fantastic. The Grammys, you know, the years that I did it, Andy Williams hosted it and John Denver hosted it. And I think LL Cool J does a great job as host. But I think with the Oscars, because it is not, quote, a performance show, so you have to create things that are going to be interesting, how you present an award. And so other things become important, the set, and bringing in performance that's organic to the show and to the movies. And, you know, a lot of shows that we did over the years, that was a big part of it.
There's been a lot of controversy over the years about, you know, who hosts specific shows, but none more than the Oscars. Who would be the ideal host? And it doesn't even have to be a name, but what type of talent do you think makes an ideal Oscar host?
Well, let's just say hosts, for starters. It's really hard to get people to host things. It's kind of a no-win situation for many of them, because no matter what they do, somehow it's never enough. And a lot of people don't want to take that on. You don't have Johnny Carson anymore. You don't have Bob Hope. So the people that have really done it really well, they don't, you know, they've done it. They've been there, they've done it. And for the Academy Awards, there's been a lot of hosts that have been tried that haven't worked out. I think that the host of these shows, no matter what it is, has to be organic to the community and to the award show. They kind of have to be of the audience, of that particular audience. Doesn't mean that they have to, quote, be a movie star per se, but they have to be part of the community, and that way they have a frame of reference and they're accepted. You know, so Andy Williams was a great singer, John Denver, he made a lot of sense for the Grammys. LL Cool J is perfect. Tonys have been great in terms of the host. And the Oscars, over the years, there have been a lot of experiments. In the many years, they didn't have one host. They had several movie stars. And they rotated, you know, Ellen Burstyn, Robin Williams, I don't remember who all they were. But it's hard with multiples because then you have to take care of 3 people or 4 people instead of one person. Billy Crystal was a great host of the Oscars. He was terrific. He wasn't mean, you know. He was of the community. He knew the people, and he was great on his feet, you know. Some of the best moments that Billy did were ad-lib, because he knew how to do that. Steve Martin was a wonderful host. And Ellen hosted the Emmys, and one of her best hosting jobs was the year after 9/11, when we had to postpone the show 3 times. It was one of her finest moments, and I would say this also about Steve Martin when he hosted the Oscars after we went to war with Iraq, that both of them gave the audience permission to have a good time, and that was really important. They came out, they were funny, respectful, and they allowed the audience to have a good time. They gave the audience permission to have a good time, because in those kind of dramatic situations, everybody is worried. They don't want to be seen like they're having a good time when something horrible is going on. And I think that was Ellen's. She hosted the Emmys twice. Don asked her to host the Emmys when we did it at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium. That was her first time. I think she had hosted the Grammys before that, but the second time she hosted the Emmys, It was at the Schubert Theater, and she was tremendous. So the ideal host, it just depends on the show and the situation, but I just think that it has to be somebody that really understands the audience that they're playing to, not just the television audience, but the people that are sitting in that room.
Earlier you talked about Marty Pacetta creating a template for award shows. You mentioned the boxes with the nominees as they're being announced, seat fillers, the people who would who were hired to just fill those seats literally when the star was up on stage or something. And, what was different? What was it like before then?
I don't know because I didn't do it. I have no idea. Because he did the Oscars before I joined he had done some with Howard Koch, I believe, before. So I honestly don't know, but I know that he was very involved in creating a lot of these things, and a lot of he was very involved with everything, the lighting and the design and everything.
What do you think is the importance of award shows?
Well, there's so many of them now. When I was doing them, there were only the 4. I call them the 4 traditional ones. Now there's tons of shows. And I think there's too many of them, actually. But when variety ceased to be viable, that's when people started doing a lot of awards shows. And I think that in many ways, for many of these awards shows, it's now a way for artists and studios to plug upcoming projects, to get them out there in the public, and now with social media, even more so. But I think with a lot of them, when you see people come out and they're introduced so-and-so from the new movie coming out in 2 weeks, and that's why they're on that show. I think because there's so many of them, it takes away from some of the specialness and the surprise element. But it's now our form of variety show.
I'm going to name some names for you who were producers of various award shows. Just give me a quick thought of, what it was like either working with the person or what was memorable about that, okay? Yeah. So let's just start with Alexander Cohen.
Well, I only did one show with him, and it was the one time that I really, really made a horrible mistake, and I was timing the show, and I timed the rehearsal, and I didn't time it wrong. I didn't time it correctly, and we wound up being short, and we had to fill in with I don't know what. I only worked with him once. I'm surprised that anybody asked me to come back to do the Emmys after that. But that was one of the last times that I ever did any work in the booth where I was actually, involved with timing the show. It was awful. It was so embarrassing. So I didn't have too much to do with him, really.
Bob Finkel?
Bob Finkel was a big producer at that time, and he produced the Emmys, and he was really a classy man. He really was. And, those were the days that I worked with Marty. So, he was very, if you want to say, old school. But he was really a classy man. I just remember he was a beautiful dresser, always had a nice car, and his daughter wound up working with us, and I really liked him a lot.
Don Mischer?
Don Mischer is somebody that I've worked with almost as long as with George Stevens Jr. I have a very long television history with Don, and Don is very special and very unique. He brings a lot to any show. He's extremely creative. Obviously, he's a brilliant director, great eye, loves music, and he's great at the overall show and figuring out the rundown. He's very good at that. He's great timing a live show. He's very involved with writing. I mean, he's the whole package, and we've done a lot of good stuff together, and, he's going to go down as one of these legends, actually. He's wonderful to work with. We have a lot of laughs. He's very kind, and he's very intense. And again, he's one of these people that you have to keep up with him. I did a lot of work with him over the years, many, many, many shows. not just the Kennedy Center Honors when he was the director, but a lot of big specials. You know, we did Liberty Weekend. That was part of this whole thing that we did. Liberty Weekend and opening of Euro Disney and lots of things. And you know, he loves the arts, and he started out doing specials with Twyla Tharp and Misha Baryshnikov, and he's the whole package. He's involved in absolutely everything, and he really, when he focuses on the show, he adds his own special touch to it, you know, and he'll rearrange things, and he knows all about timing in terms of what's going to work when. I love working with Don, and I continue to work with him.
George Stevens Jr.
George I've worked for longer than anybody. He's a man of impeccable taste, as I've mentioned earlier. Class. He's a brilliant writer. Obviously, he's Hollywood royalty, but he's made his own mark by creating these amazing shows, the AFI tributes and Kennedy Center Honors. He's very specific in terms of what, you know, he likes, and I'm very honored to have had such a long working relationship with him, because he's really one of a kind, and he's very circumspect, which I really appreciate. He grew up in Hollywood, and he made his own mark, but the people that he knows, the people that he's worked with, the presidents that he knows, all the people that he's come into contact with, you would never hear him brag about it. Never. He's also very loyal. He's been extremely loyal to me. And I was so happy when he received the Governor's Awards from the Academy. I was so excited. He says, I think you might be more excited than anybody. I was so excited for him because I know what it meant, because his father had been the president of the Academy. And so there's a lot of history there. And the fact that he comes from such Hollywood history, and that his father directed some of my favorite movies of all time, you know, it's a privilege to work for him. It really is. And I have a very good, close relationship with him, and it means a lot to me. It really does.